Snack and good networking. You've met some people, exchanged Twitter handles, and now we can continue our next chat. We're going to be talking about rethinking the labor market shortly, but to prep that conversation, I want to talk about automation for good. And joining me to do that is Margareta Muci-Babic. Thank you so much for joining us and helping me pronounce your name correctly. Let's get right to it. Automation for good. When a lot of people think of automation, they think of losing their jobs. They think of eliminating humans. It has a negative connotation for so many people. So I'm just curious to know what's an example of automation for good, which is what you're focused on.
Absolutely. Can you tell me if it's working?
I think not yet. Hold on. They'll get it going. We can buy you a little bit of time.
Let's try again.
Now it's working.
Awesome.
So, an example of automation for good, just to start off the conversation.
Absolutely. But before we get into that, just let me say thank you for inviting me to this opportunity. It's great to be here. It's actually my first physical event after COVID. So it's
Really?
yes.
Welcome back to the real world, not the virtual world. And of course, I should have mentioned that you're the Chief Culture Officer of UiPath.
Actually, I would be privileged to
Oh,
be,
sorry.
but it's my
You're the
colleague.
Director of Public Affairs and
Yes.
Social Impact.
Yes.
Your colleague's laughing as I just promoted you over her.
Yeah, that's excellent, and looking forward to the discussion after our fireside chat. What I want to start today is just to tell you a bit about automation in general and how we as UiPath work in this field. So you've been mentioning automation, and that's around for quite some time. But UiPath is doing something slightly different. We're developing a software automation. We're developing an end-to-end platform to help organizations of all sizes, both from the public and the private sector, automate business tasks and make sure that their operations can be run digitally, can become more productive, and make sure that employees are also more engaged at work. So with this in mind, another important element would be that our purpose is to accelerate human achievement. So this is a very profound statement if you think about it.
Absolutely.
And thinking about what you mentioned, the baggage that the term automation actually has, and then thinking about accelerating human achievement, we have started to think about giving a higher mission to automation. How can we make sure that in addition to productivity, efficiency, return on time, engagement, we can help our customers, but also their employees, leverage this technology to become a force for good? And good is, of course, very difficult to grasp, right? What do we actually mean with good? So we started thinking about the UN SDGs as an example. We know that companies are really investing in aligning their corporate agendas with the United Nations SDGs. They want to become more sustainable. They want to become closer to their employees. They want to connect their purpose with the employees' purpose. So in this particular context, we have invested in finding the link between automation and this higher mission. During COVID-19, a very important thing happened in the sense that we realized that we have so little time to turn digital. And especially in the healthcare industry, it was very, very important to actually care for the patients. What we have witnessed is an impressive amount of paperwork, of bureaucracy, of repetitive tasks that doctors and nurses have to deal with, in addition to looking out for the patients, right? So this was one of the first kind of automation for good solutions that we have developed. We have connected the purpose of the clinicians to cater for the patients and for the act of health and well-being, enabling them to be assisted by automated solutions that can take care of that bureaucracy, of the paperwork, of the legacy applications that sometimes don't work. You have to connect them and make sure that they have the time to spend, again, time with the patients. Building on that, we have looked at other opportunities for sustainable development. This is, for example, as we have seen earlier today, the topic of environment. How can we leverage this technology to help the environment? How can we leverage, again, this technology to help nonprofits and attain social impact? This is automation for good.
So I'm curious, when we look at some of the main returns that automation brings, you have to, of course, focus on efficiency
Yeah.
and cost savings. So again, cost savings is that's where people get jumpy, is that means saving my job. So what are some of the examples of automation for good, and maybe the ones that don't have that negative connotation, or can show people that there's a whole gambit of options when people think about automation?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very important to think about automation as a tool that helps the employee do less robotic work.
Less busy work.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we
And
hear it so often when we talk about automation in grocery stores. There is some repetitive task that grocery store workers, supermarket workers say, I don't want to have to do this if this part of my job could be automated, so I could do this stuff that's more the complicated stuff going from one end to the other, where a
yes.
robot can't necessarily
Yes.
do that efficiently.
In our context, think about the return that you can have as an employee. With gaining time back and increasing your productivity, you can spend more time on interaction, human interaction, use your time for more creative work, the type of work that you want to do, because automation automates tasks, not jobs. Everyone at work is doing, to some extent, some repetitive work. And most of us don't like to do that. So what if we have this aid that can help us repurpose our time and our resources on doing the kind of work that we love to do? And this is again, an important aspect of automation for good.
So I mean, I'm using the grocery store example, but what's an example that you have? What's a tangible example, somebody's everyday job where the automation can be for the greater good?
Yeah, sure. Let me just give you a couple of examples. One from the healthcare industry, and I've mentioned COVID-19. Very brief example is from the European Medicines Agency. And during that time, and the EMA in general has a critical mission, right? They had to make sure that there are stocks available for essential medicines that you would use in treating the symptoms of COVID-19. So the European Medicines Agency had to collect information from the pharmaceutical companies in all over Europe, connect databases, make sure that they monitor and track the stocks, right, of medicine. This was a process that lasted hours, including days sometimes. It was very, very repetitive, manual, very, very burdensome. And with automation, we managed to reduce that time to only 4 hours. So thinking about days versus hours, for something that is critical as having visibility on the kind of medicine you have available in treating COVID-19. That was one of the examples. But there's other examples too, especially if we think about social impact. Connecting automation with social impact can be done in multiple ways. One of the ways in which you could do it is through upskilling and reskilling. The traditional way of upskilling and reskilling is, either done through a company that you work for, who is investing in the skills development of their own employees, but you can also do it to nonprofits, through universities, and this is something that we invest in as a company through Academic Alliance and through other programs. More importantly, you can also create more meaningful employment opportunities, more inclusive employment opportunities, if you come with this purpose in mind. And in this context, I wanted to share an example from Dentsu, a company that we work with and our customer. And together we have managed to upskill employees, neurodiverse employees, and make sure that they get employment within organizations to become RPA developers or get jobs that are created by this technology. So you have the mission to make work more inclusive, but you also need to partner with like-minded organizations to make that happen.
Well, speaking of partnering, that's a perfect place for us to expand this chat now and bring in the other folks who are participating in the next part of our conversation, which is about rethinking labor relations and working spaces. No other partnership like that. I don't know if it makes sense for you to go there just so it's the order that we have on stage here. But Margareta, that was great. And I want to
Thank you so
continue
much.
the conversation, bring up Peter Ryan. Peter is the principal for Ryan Advisories. Good to have you back up on stage. Margareta, you'll go in the middle, and then we'll bring up Vedrana. I want to make sure that I get everybody's titles right. I've just promoted somebody else. If you want a promotion, just sit with me. Managing partner for Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia at Colliers. And then behind you guys, up on stage, joining us virtually, welcome to you guys that we've been watching you watch us this whole time, is Michael Green from the Social Progress Imperative. Hey, Michael, you've got a great connection and a great picture behind you. I love your zooming. And Andrea Baciu, UiPath, who actually is in the C-suite. You have a new member of the C-suite that I promoted. She's the Chief Culture Officer for UiPath. So I want to broaden this out. We're talking about automation for good, what's happened with labor, what's happened with the workforce. I mean, for me, this is quite personal because I went from a huge corporation that did everything in person to a company that did everything offline. But then I changed to work. I changed to another company that is 100% offline. It's not going, 100% online. It is not going back in person. And so that's a real culture shock in a lot of ways, and it makes you have to retool everything you do. And I think about people that I know as before and after, the people that I knew before the pandemic who I work with, and now the people I know after the pandemic, after the pandemic started, people that I don't know if I'll ever meet in person. There are people that I work with. I mean, right now, Michael's partner could come by, Michael's kids could come by, the housekeeper could come by, the dog could come by, a person without a shirt could come by. We know these people so much more intimately because we're in their homes 24/7, but I may never meet Michael in real life, even if we spend years working with each other. So my real question here is the impact on the labor force overall of COVID. Michael, I might start with you. When you take a step back and you look at how COVID, the place where we are now, how COVID has impacted the labor force, what do you see, Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Samuel. Nice to be with you all. I mean, we did some work looking at COVID risks across London. And one of the things that was really striking was how if you could work virtually, you were doing so much better than someone who couldn't. We saw an absolutely huge divergence between West London, full of people, office jobs, working digitally remotely, and East London.
I live in West London, and I volunteer in East London, so I can imagine exactly what you're about to say.
And in East London, you had a lot of people who were working in jobs like public transport, the healthcare system, where they were having to leave their homes. They were also often in poorer households with more underlying health issues, with more multiple occupancy households. And as a result, you saw this huge divergence in outcomes in terms of COVID risk and COVID outcomes in terms of death and morbidity. So certainly one thing is that if you could work digitally, there was a huge dividend. And maybe just switching to a personal example, for us, I mean, we're a global NGO, we operate across a whole bunch of different time zones. So we were already virtual before COVID hit. What we've found is it's fantastic as a way of being able to harness talent from different parts of the world, and also a way of inclusion. I think we all have, we've got a lot of young families in our team, and by operating across different time zones, we're all able to juggle our childcare needs and family needs, even in COVID when we were homeschooling, and keep the business rolling. So there's definitely lots of opportunities in this new digital economy to have more inclusive and efficient workforces.
So, Michael, picking up on that, and I'm going to pivot over to Peter now. I mean, Peter, did this just exacerbate this divide that we've been seeing, the growing divide of the wealthy being able to hold much more of the wealth in society? I mean, that gap has been getting so much worse in places like the UK, the US, where I'm from. Did this really just make things a lot worse? I'm just going to make sure that your microphone is on. Yeah, it's not on, but hold on. Now it is. Give them a couple seconds. There you go.
Great. I'm technology challenged, and turning lights or microphones on is very tough for me. Look, I'm not going to comment necessarily on the divide between the rich and the poor and the discussion around economic classes in this point. But what I want to make an illustration about is this issue about work from home and the remote working, which I think is very important. And certainly it was exacerbated over the course of the pandemic. But let's be perfectly frank as well. Those of us who have been following the trend about remote working over the course of the past 10 years will note that there was a significant amount of movement towards this, especially in countries like the United Kingdom, where you saw a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, transport challenges, issues related to the being able to get to and from long distances, to and from work. A lot of people were choosing that they were going to take that hybrid model. And we saw this in locations like Canada, where I live, the United States, across Western Europe. What I would say is that the pandemic ended up really magnifying that in a very short amount of time. And study after study is showing that individuals are social animals. Individuals would like to be able to actually meet people who they work with. They would actually like to be able to go out for lunch or grab a coffee. That doesn't mean they want to be in the office every day of the week, but what it does mean is that they would like to be able to come to an office. They'd like to be able to come to a shared workspace in which they're able to try and gravitate around that social element. And let's be perfectly frank as well. As individuals, as social individuals, how many of us can sit and admit that they've made friends in the workplace? Probably everybody in this room. They've made a lot of great connections that have transformed from the professional side to the social side. And this is so important to consider. And something that I think you'd mentioned was about the pre-pandemic workmates and the post ones. And I can't get over the number of people who I got to know over the course of 2.5 years through Teams or through Zoom. And we became very close and very good friends. But I realized one day, I actually haven't met many of these people.
And you may never.
And we may never. Well, we're starting to meet one another.
Yeah,
whether
some of them.
Once they meet me, I don't know if they want to stay friends or not. That's another question entirely. But the reality is there is a fundamental shift that's going on in the labor force about remote working. And for those of us who think that there's going to be one simple silver bullet or magic answer, no, it's still a work in progress. And this is something that I think every employer needs to take into account as employees are flexing their muscles in the current labor market.
Andrea, I want to bounce over to you. For me, having spent a lot of time in emerging Europe, thank you, Andrew, and thank you to this organization for expanding my horizons. But also, I've spent a lot of time in the Philippines. I worked with CNN Philippines for a long time. For me now that I'm a managing editor of a platform, I'm hiring people, this has been a gold mine because I've met so many people in Romania, in the Philippines, who are so incredibly talented, who are innovative sometimes out of necessity because they may have smaller budgets and may not charge as much as their American or British counterparts. So for me, a lot of this has been a dream because I can work with people who I never could have hired before. For you, in the C-suite, as I've mentioned, what does this mean for hiring for you? But specifically, what does this mean for emerging Europe? All of these, emerging Europe has experienced so much brain drain. For so many years, we've had conferences like this one where we've talked about brain drain. What does this mean now for the region that a guy sitting in London can hire somebody sitting in Romania and maybe they can be more efficient and maybe they can do it at a better price, Andrea?
Samuel, first of all, thank you for having us and congratulations for such an altruistic and generous mission you guys have at Emerging Europe. We so much need you and we are humbled and honored by us being part of your dialogue here. Margareta, virtual hug. I wish I would be there with you, but this week I could not because my oldest daughter was going through exams. That's the beauty of working virtually. 3 years ago, I bet you would have said, if you cannot come physically, then thank you, but no thank you. So here we are. So to your question, Samuel, I think there is a blessing and a curse in the same time. And here is what I think is that we are coming. Eastern Europe is coming and is going to conquer the world. And more people are getting out of our small but mighty countries, are making a difference. Like imagine the first unicorn coming out of Eastern Europe. We were blessed and very fortunate for having a bunch of talented and really magical people that believe that is impossible is really possible. And because of that, the startup ecosystem that you see in the last couple of years is increasing and increasing and increasing. People have stamina, they have perseverance, they have ambitions bigger than their life, and they have the education. Thank God for that. And what I think we need to do is to make sure that we take the responsibility to invest in the generations to come, make sure that we give back to the society, because Rome wasn't built in a day, and for it to be sustainable, we have to play our part and make sure that we pay it forward and invest in those generations for them to really grow up in a global citizen mindset. It counts less where you are coming from right now. What it counts is how you contribute to the world, how you contribute to the community, how you contribute to the intimate circle you are part of. So let's make sure we provide the education and the opportunities equally, no matter where we are coming from.
Vedrana, if we look at Central, Eastern, Southeastern Europe, now that I can hire somebody, hire people in those regions, does that make it even tougher for the companies who are trying to keep people in the regions? Because maybe now Andrea has to compete with somebody like me in the UK, or is this a case of, when the tide rises, so do all the boats?
Thank you for having me on this event and on this panel. I'd say there is a good and a bad side of it all. Maybe from a real estate perspective, I can give a bit of glance to how we anticipated the change on the real estate market, especially in the offices once the pandemic started. So we thought that offices are forever gone. Nowadays, we understand that people are returning back to the offices. They are working from the offices. We have a hybrid momentum. Some of the businesses, for example, Elon Musk insisted on everyone getting back to the office. On the other hand, Apple implemented a hybrid model, 3 days per week in the office, 2 days out of the office.
By the way, I think if I did that at the company that I'm helping run, I think I would lose a lot of employees very quickly.
Exactly.
Now, it's not Tesla, and the stock, our stock isn't as worth as much as Tesla, but I can guarantee you that would be, the people aren't even in the same place anymore.
Exactly.
They moved, and they're not moving back to New York, most of them.
Going back to your question, so we've invented work from home, then work from anywhere. Now we are implementing workation momentum. So basically, people can actually work from anywhere. Companies that decided to involve the employees and actually test their preferences are prospering. They're actually doing quite better than the others that imposed drastic measures. And I think the good side, going back to your question, the good side of the momentum and the hybrid life that we are going to live from this point on, probably forever, is that we have the right to choose. So the harmony or the tango between the employees and the employer will be more, let's say, synchronized if we involve the employees in the process of deciding from where to work, how long to work, on which distances, which time zones, and so on and so forth. Going back to the real estate angle, it really dramatically changes the office requirements. The office buildings and office spaces are changing dramatically. They will be there, even we see that there is an expansion or even the increase of the requirement over the office spaces, but the office spaces today, a year ago and 3 years ago, are looking totally different, and they are serving their users totally differently.
Can you give us some tangible examples?
I can give you tangible examples. We have a number of clients for whom we delivered in whole Central and Southeastern Europe the service workplace solution. There is no unified solution for all. So basically, our process of thinking through how the office space should look like is, of course, combined with focus groups, not unanimous, but without a name, surveys, etc., etc. So we want to hear what those people want. Where the major change happened is that we moved online, so most of the calls are happening in the small booths.
Yeah.
Those booths are not anymore, like sardines squeezed in the space. They're more
'Cause
spacious.
even when you go back to the office, then you still have Zoom calls, so then you can't be
Exactly.
all in the same
We
room,
will
or you have
always
different
have
ones.
Zoom
So,
calls.
yeah.
But the common area and the power area, creative zones, the innovation zones are becoming more and more open, more and more inviting, and where office space shown to be having the greatest advantage is actually the chemistry, the energy, the creativity, the innovation that can hardly be recreated on online meetings. So we are, as you said, we are animals, social animals, and we still appreciate a way lot, and we work way better when we are together.
So bigger phone booths is one of the solutions. Peter, I know you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I couldn't echo enough what Vidrana has just said. I work specifically in the BPO space, and one of the things that we're picking up on right now is that in order to get the agents back into the contact centers, which is being mandated by a lot of different clients of outsourcers as well, and this is where we're seeing a bit of a, when you take like the two same ends of a magnet and try putting it together and they start pushing apart. Well, this is what we're seeing. A lot of the clients are demanding that the agents go back in, and the agents don't want to go. So the outsourcers are looking to try and find a way to make these contact centers a lot more hospitable. The best description I'd be able to give is what you'd imagine a WeWork to be like a few years ago. And whereas, as you mentioned, you used to have these little booths that people would be sitting in and toiling in for 8-9 hours. Now it's a lot more open plan. The break rooms are a lot more, I would say, comfortable. They're also a lot larger, and they're conducive to that social element. Where I think a lot of the outsourcers are starting to panic a little bit, though, is when we take that idea about WeWork, when does it become no work? When does the work actually get done, as opposed to it's becoming more of a meetup center and a social gathering center? And again, this is a story that's not yet completely written. I think that my friend Mark Angus, who's in the room, works in the same sector as I, and he's seeing the exact same trends. Watch this space, no pun intended.
And Michael, I'm curious because there's this huge opportunity now, whether you're in Southeast London or Southeast Europe. There's so much demand for labor. There aren't enough people. We see this all across the world, almost uniformly, almost. But there seems to be a gap. When I go to Elephant and Castle, where I do my volunteer work, I'm telling people, quit your job, go somewhere else. There are, help needed signs everywhere. How do we bridge that gap, no matter which Southeast you're in? Oh, maybe you're on mute, Michael. Just double check.
Sorry
There we
about
go.
that. Yes, jumping on something Andrea was saying earlier, there has been an extraordinary story of convergence across Europe that people haven't really noticed yet, outside the region. So my organisation produces the Social Progress Index, a measure of the real quality of life of countries and regions. And what we've seen is that countries like, Czech Republic, Estonia have already overtaken the United States in real quality of life. Poland's coming up quite behind. Bulgaria, Romania are a bit behind, but converging. So that's already happening, and I think people just haven't noticed. And maybe just to take a topical example, if we see what's going on in Ukraine at the moment, I think it's actually opened people's eyes to what talented, determined, imaginative people the people of Ukraine are, who really has changed perceptions. So I think we have to recognize that perceptions lag behind reality, whereas the reality as we see in our data is how dynamic these societies are. One thing we also see in the data is looking at regions of the EU, is that the migration patterns are explained better by social progress than by economic factors. So people actually move to where there's real quality of life. So if we're thinking about retaining talent, attracting talent back, it's not just about the economic factors. The countries have got to continue investing in education and health and rights and all those kind of things that are the real quality of life that workers want. And also critically, those are things that investors want. Investors want stable working environment, investment environments where there's a reliable workforce. So actually investing in those kind of social progress factors is such an important part of a development strategy. Unfortunately, we're seeing emerging Europe is on the right trajectory.
I see
Yes.
both Vedrana and Andrea nodding in agreement. I'll start with you, Vedrana, and then jump back to you, Andrea.
Back to what Michael was saying, I think a phenomenon of digital nomads actually is proving what Michael was saying. In any given moment in Croatia, there is more than 6,000 digital nomads. Croatia in 2020 was actually the first country in Europe that implemented the digital nomad visa for 12 months. They're spending millions of euros and earning, obviously, but they work in a totally different spectrum of companies. And they came to Croatia either off-season, on-season, for the quality of life, for the safety and everything that goes along. And
Are
Croatia...
they mainly Europeans, Americans?
Third countries, mostly third countries,
Yeah.
which is really interesting to see. And given the fact that some statistics are saying that in 2035 there will be more than 1 billion of people working remotely, the shift, the change is here. So basically what we are talking today will probably in 5 years' time be another different story. The legislation is well behind. So basically where the regulator in none of our countries hasn't implemented the solutions related to the work from home, work from anywhere, digital nomads and everything, is proving again how the regulation is slow. Again, I can give the example of my home country, but as well, I believe it's everywhere similar or the same. So it's up to us as employers to regulate the relationships, and this is really a gap space that will need to be adjusted in the time to come. Needless to say, maternity, paternity leaves, workation, how will we measure whether people are on the coastline working, how many hours, how to implement KPIs not being key performance, but key purpose indicators. These are the shifts that we are facing nowadays, and in the time to come, we'll need way more attention from both ends.
Andrea, I see you shaking your head, but especially when Michael was talking about the quality of life for workers ahead of the United States, although that's not really surprising because you guys all know that we're workaholics in the United States, often to our detriment. That quality of life in places in emerging Europe, what are those pinpoints, Andrea? Why is the quality of life higher, and will this make it higher? Will remote work make it higher for you in those regions?
Yeah, I was nodding when Michael was talking, but also on the previous note that Vedrana mentioned. So just two elements I want to introduce to the table. I think it's less about the setup, the office or the home or where people are working, being that overseas or in the hometown or in Spain or in West London. It's about the work that they do. If that work is meaningful, if it is purposeful, if it puts their strengths to work, if it is something that they can contribute to something bigger than themselves, then that will make them happy, regardless of where they are, because they will switch places. They will be nomads, as Vedrana mentioned. So it's not where they are, but what they will do and how companies will craft the space within a, freedom within a, liberty within a, freedom within a framework setup type of job. Like all job descriptions are obsolete. When people are thinking about jobs, they should think about allowing for the employee to come in with their best self and contribute in a meaningful manner, because otherwise they will move. I mean, we are reading about Great Resignation. I honestly believe the answer to the question whether it was a resignation or a migration is still to be told, because people are not resigning to go and enjoying a life on the beach somewhere. They are going to a different company. So the question is what they did not found in the current employer for them to think, I want to change. So McKinsey is putting studies out there that shows contribution to something bigger, meaning in their work, purposeful driven jobs is what will keep people happy regardless where they will have to work. And I honestly believe we have a play to work here and again, a responsibility. I mean, with automation, we can do a lot of that stuff because we give people time back for them to do whatever they wish to do with, and we give companies the possibility to achieve their business results faster and better. So that was my point. And on the quality element, Samuel, I think it depends. I wouldn't generalize. I think there are cultures around the planet that are new and have a legacy and a DNA for a specific output. But I think we should suspend judgment and allow people to contribute with whatever best work they can bring to the table. And if we do so, they will be happy, they will benefit from, and the whole society will get better in its sense.
I just have to say, I'm dreaming of working in Croatia right now. A workation in Croatia sounds absolutely lovely. But then when I think about all the tax ramifications, I'm an American who lives in London. I have to file tax 6 times a year, 4 in the US, 2 in the UK. So, Peter, what can governments do to help spur this? I mean, clearly Croatia's onto something good. If they're giving this visa, they're tapping into something, but there are so many ramifications after that. Sitting from your perch, what would you recommend governments do, and maybe in partnership with the private sector, to help facilitate this? Because I could see, especially, and when you talk about real estate prices in places like the US and the UK, I could see somebody wanting to relocate from New York to Croatia. No joke.
Well, we're seeing this a lot in the BPO space already, where the concept of, I think you put the term out, work from anywhere, has become very much the norm. And it's not even like working from home, it's literally working from anywhere. I think that what governments can do, number one, in terms of cooperation with the private sector, number one, listen to what the private sector needs in order to facilitate this. If it's developing the right tax treaties to minimize the bureaucracy and the confusion about filing taxes to different jurisdictions, that's number one. Number two, I think making sure that the level of connectivity is going to be as robust as possible. And this is something that I've been very impressed with in emerging Europe. I've had the chance to travel since the pandemic finished, and I was through a few different locations in the region, and I was really amazed at how the level of being able to connect, whether it's on the telephone, the internet, was as good, if not better, than what I would find back in Canada. And that's an ideal thing if somebody's deciding that they're going to say, well, to hell with it, I'm sick of the winters in Montreal, I'm going to come and I'm going to stay in Croatia or Krakow for a while and work. That's going to be essential. And to my mind as well, the governments are going to need to try and do whatever they possibly can to make sure that when we're talking about prices of real estate again, that there is a level of stock, whether it's residential real estate or co-working spaces, etc., that are going to be affordable, to make sure that digital nomads are going to be in a position where they can travel and spend extended periods of time working in a location. Again, these are things that are not going to get solved overnight, but the discussions have to start now. And what I'm truly encouraged at by the governments within the emerging Europe region is that there seems to be much greater of a willingness to actually have these discussions than you would find in many other parts of the world.
And Margareta, getting back to where we started this conversation, when you think about the tools that these types of people working on workations, I was working from a park in central Brussels earlier this morning, before the day really kicked off. What do you think those tools are? I mean, you alluded to some of it with UiPath, but what do you think are those platforms that workers really need to be able to do this throughout the world?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. I think obviously technology can be a key enabler in doing that, but I wouldn't consider the technology as the only, key a key enabler in this conversation. It's a lot about how the relationship with work is evolving. How are we, how do we want to position ourselves in this new relationship, in this new social contract? I think this is a conversation that's currently being shaped, and it's probably going to evolve in new venues that right now it's difficult to predict for sure. But one thing is certain, I think we need to make sure that people do more of the work that they love to do. Now they have the freedom to do it. If they are vocal and express what they want to achieve, now it's their chance to do that.
Fascinating. Just if everybody maybe could give me one anecdote, something that they've seen. I mean, I love the Croatia anecdote, but if there's a place or a platform or something that they've seen in emerging Europe, in these locations, that just could give us a little slice of the future. I'll go first, although mine's kind of the reverse, and maybe that'll give you guys some time to think, but I'm based in the UK. I lived through and reported on Brexit, and I have to tell you, I mean, nobody wants anybody to suffer, but for those people who are upset that the UK snubbed the EU, there's a very underreported story about the isolation of UK companies, especially UK financial companies, that has had very little coverage in international media, certainly outside of UK financial media. I mean, it's really sad for me to see companies that were vibrant, that were having Romanians and their families come or maybe go back and start a business. They can't even start new relationships a lot of times with those people. So while so many people are spreading their wings, the UK is paying an amazingly difficult financial toll and lack of business innovation for having gone inward. Of course, we were promised free trade deals with all these countries, and it hasn't materialized, much to the UK's detriment. So I hope you have a better example than I have. Maybe you can make me think of working on a Croatian beach, but something just to leave us with a little bit of flavor, Peter?
Well, going back to the digital nomad element within the scope of emerging Europe, when I was at an event that Pro Progressio put on in Poland 2 months ago, one of the elements that I found most interesting and most inspiring was when there was a representative from the Ukrainian IT Association who came and spoke at the event and discussed specifically the opportunity to hire the literally thousands of individuals that were crossing the border as refugees with the technology skills, with the mathematical skills, with the customer service skills, lots of opportunity that in a very, very unfortunate situation means the opportunity for employment for people who are not looking to sit in a refugee camp, but they actually want to work, they want to be productive. And to my mind, that was probably the most important presentation that happened at that event. And it actually had traction as well, because it did gain a lot of individuals employment from representatives of the different companies that attended.
Michael Green in London, a silver lining that like Peter's talking about, or any type of color or flavor you can leave us with as we close out the panel?
Well, one piece of colour is actually, yes, one of my British staff did go and become a digital nomad in Croatia. So
You're all welcome.
Just one fact, I mean, again, looking at social progress data across Europe, we find one clear pattern, is there's no relationship between the unemployment rate and levels of social progress. Old dinosaur economists like me traditionally always thought economic growth, low unemployment is the guarantee of good social outcomes. I think what we're seeing is that quality of work is the critical issue going forward. And this is why conversations like this are so important, not just for individuals, but for societies as a whole. We've got to talk about the quality of work. We can't just have lots of people in bad jobs. We've got to find good jobs that are rewarding, not just financially, but also socially, to build strong societies.
Amen, brother. Andrea?
Amen. Yes, amen to that, Michael. How about a true fact? Romania's internet infrastructure is really highly developed and competitive. We are #1 in Europe and #4 globally, with this fixed broadband speed, which is twice as the average of the global. So if you want to do business and have no problem with internet, we are going to welcome you here. That's one message. And second message, I want to give just a big shout of applause and big thank you to Oleksiy Toporkov, who is from Ukraine and is helping us to get the sound right there in the room. So just wanted to shout out for him. Thank you.
Thank you. That innovation everywhere, and seeing that Ukrainian spirit. Margareta, any little anecdote to leave us with on this subject?
I feel like my whole intervention was an anecdote. I don't know what to say. Well, just to say that technology is, in my opinion, neither bad or good, but we need to bring purpose to it, and we need to act on it and make sure that we are leveraging it for good.
I'll just pick up one thing I meant to say, Andrea, as well. I just came back from a workation in Colombia. I was gobsmacked by the internet speed. I was so afraid. I was checking hotels, and I know somebody who's actually investing in a company just putting in high-speed, investing huge amounts of money in high-speed internet for remote places in Colombia and Costa Rica. So, but I'll leave you with the last thought, Vedrana, because you've really sparked my imagery today of my workation in Croatia. So why don't you finish out this panel?
Well, I'll give one fact which actually doesn't a lot to do with where we live. In Japan, there is a severe increase of criminal acts because people are so detached from one another, so they conduct a crime in order to go to prison and actually spend more quality time with people there. We are not there yet. I think as a final note, I think that we need to observe and understand the new generations because new generations are coming. I mean, for God's sakes, kids that got to this world in 2000 are now already becoming workforce. So we need to hear them, understand them, and adopt our way of thinking and doing stuff in order to accommodate to their way of thinking, creating, innovating. For quite a long time, they've been only juniors in most of our enterprises. They've been subordinates. Nowadays, they're becoming part of the teams. They need to learn from us different things, values, empathy, and all other things that we, as a bit older ones, are bringing to the table, but we need to learn from them and actually adopt the world to them, because they will be inheriting what we've created so far.
To your point, Vidrana, shout out to my company, and genuinely, this is not a plug, but Real Vision, we've had some younger people say, I've never met anybody, it's their first job. They've literally never met a coworker before. So-and-so is flying into Arizona, can I get drinks with them? Will the company pay for that? The amount to pay for drinks, even an expensive dinner compared to rent, which we used to have to pay, is minuscule, and how much it gives people in getting to know that person. Maybe that'll keep us out of Japanese prison. So thank you very much to Peter, Margareta, Vidrana, Michael, and Andrea from London to Romania to here in Brussels. Thank you so much for joining us.